So my name is Emilio Dottore. I'm the executive director for the Milwaukee Turners here at Turner Hall. Really excited to see you all again. This virtual forum, which is the second of three important monthly forums on food and land justice, is being hosted jointly in a special partnership by the Milwaukee Turners Val Phillips Forum and the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee Center for 21st Century Studies, with support from Rid Racism Milwaukee, MICA, the National Lawyers Guild of Milwaukee, Turning Tables Tavern, and Wisconsin Voices. The forum is being broadcast on both Zoom and the Milwaukee Turners Facebook page, and we invite you to share the live feed to your own Facebook pages so that others might share and learn from this important conversation. It is, like all of our forums, being recorded and will be edited and shared in the near future so that you can return to it. We know that there are many of you watching this in group settings, and we want you to be able to access it in the future. Captioning is available, so if you'd like to click on the live transcript CC icon to use captioning or to turn it off, it's available there. You just click Show Subtitle and click on View Full Transcript to see the full captioning stream. ASL interpreters are available through the incredibly talented Derek Haney and Jill with DJC Interpreting. And if you need to communicate directly with the interpreter, please note that in the chat and we will reply to you directly. We ask speakers to please say their name each time they speak to help with accessibility. And all of you that are watching, please use the chat feature throughout this briefing if you need assistance. We're going to, of course, be monitoring the chat. And we'll be monitoring the chat in Facebook as well. So welcome, and I'm very excited to turn this over to Nicole Welk-Yeager, who is going to be hosting today's forum. Nicole?
Thanks so much, Emilio. Welcome everyone to the second roundtable conversation of our spring program titled Nourishing Trust, Considering How Food and Land Connects Us. Milwaukee Turners have a rich history with the 19th century sound mind and a sound body motto, echoing various programs of the organization today. Founded a bit later in 1968, the Center for 21st Century Studies, or C21, our mission has been to build a community of scholars to address the pressing issues of our time. With our humanities, we are a humanities at heart and interdisciplinary in action. As our charter states, quote, cooperative humanistic research is most compatible with the task of addressing the complexity of 21st century's challenges, unquote, and complex they are, with collaborations like this one essential as we tackle the pressing issues, food and land being the anchor for today's discussion. Now in Milwaukee, we acknowledge that we continue to occupy traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homeland along the southwest shores of Michigamme, North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. I'm Nicole Welk-Yeager, Deputy Director of the Center for 21st Century Studies and part of an amazing team that makes this all possible. Many thanks to them and our co-hosts, the Milwaukee Turners, for embracing and shaping this new format of what was once our annual conference, now with multiple points of access and honoring multiple ways of knowing. We invite you to engage with C21's many programs in this mission, including our podcast series, 6.5 Minutes With, that's the title of it, and it is actually 6.5 minutes long. Our interactive book club, where you'll find suggestions for things to read and view to go deeper into this year's and last year's topics, many of them recommended by the panelists here for this roundtable today. This year's participatory project, which is a survey about the journeys we make to gather, prepare, and consume food. And finally, the series of roundtable conversations. So today we consider the philosophies that anchor current efforts for food and land justice and the role trust and criticism play in imagining and building a better future. So I'm thrilled, absolutely thrilled and thankful to welcome these incredible people who are part of this session. We have Elizabeth Gabriel, an organizational equity consultant, former executive director of 2 farmer training and urban farming nonprofits, co-manager of Wellspring Forest Farm in central New York with her family, editor of the Northeast Organic Farming Association's newspaper, and here today as a member and representative of the Soul Fire Farm Speakers Collective. Cherie Rivers, Associate Professor of Geography at UNC Chapel Hill and founder of Uzuri Sanctuary, an educational biodynamic farm that builds from Black Atlantic traditions of agroecology. And Martice Scales, owner and operator of Full Circle Healing Farm just outside of Milwaukee, which he manages with his wife and 2 young sons. He is also a land stewardship fellow with the National Young Farmers Coalition. So welcome. It is wonderful to have all of you here today. So if you've been at these roundtables before, we start with introductions, just kind of diving into the topic, but are introducing one another to each other. So let's start with these brief introductions, just 2 or 3 minutes on how the topic touches your work. Elizabeth, you are part of the Soulfire Farm Speaker Collective. You are a farmer, the founder of an urban farm in Washington, D.C., and former director of the Groundswell Center Farmer Training Program. All of these initiatives were executed with specific visions in mind. What philosophies have guided your work?
Thanks for having me today. You can hear me? Okay, I have a box in front of my screen, but I think I can get rid of it. Okay, sorry. All right, thanks for having me today. Yeah, it's a great question. I saw it when you sent it around, and thinking like back on it is an interesting question as opposed to when I was in it, for some of them. I think overall, I mean, and I'm here with the hat of being a Speakers Collective member with Soulfire Farm. And that brings like a consistent thread through all my work. As a cisgendered white woman, I hold a lot of power and privilege. And over the course of not that long, but over the course of maybe a decade or a little bit more, I've tried to understand what that means and how I can use my power and privilege to impact the food system in a positive way for people who don't have equal access. There's a lot of racism and a lot of inequities in the food system and many of our systems. And so I've tried to incorporate that power into my work to see how I can use it to like redistribute wealth, redistribute funds, lift up voices and efforts of people of color in the farming community, both locally and at a bigger level with like grant support, access to whether it's resources and education or specifically money. So I think in a lot of ways, really the food is central to all of us. So I've been in food system work for so long. And I'm really grounded by both the earth and the soil, but also the connection that food provides for people and for community. And I really just try to hold that in building relationships built on trust and kindness. Trust takes a long time to build. So really like moving at the speed of trust and trying to not get wrapped up in like my need for speed, but actually slow down and think about the earth as like realizing things grow slowly, and that means there's more stability. And so if we build relationships with that same kind of philosophy, they tend to be stronger and work better. Being here as a representative of Soulfire Farm is a privilege and an honor. So Soulfire Farm, if you don't know it, is definitely worth checking out their website. They're a Black and Indigenous-led farm in upstate New York, outside of Albany. And I've taken a few training programs with them, and if you take their programs, they have a collective that they get so many requests for speakers that they started this collective to say, hey, folks of you who know us, you can speak on behalf of us, either give presentations or do something like this. And so when it's appropriate to have a white person speaking on behalf of them, then, in this situation, and like I sent my bio to you, and then I'm able to speak to take the onus off of the work that Soulfire is doing for their community of Indigenous, Latinx, and people of color. So I'm always happy to be able to do it when it makes sense. And sometimes it's not right for me to speak on behalf of them, and so somebody else does. So I hope that answers your question. All right.
Yeah, I think that's a good start about sharing the labor, what that can look like and when it's appropriate, but also speaking to the stability of slowness, which I think is a really it's a clear like philosophy of mind and thinking that I think might connect with some other roundtable conversations that we'll have in the future, and connects with what we had at the previous conversation. So thanks so much, Elizabeth. Martice, your professional experience is extensive. You work on your farm, Full Circle Healing. You have experience working with a prison reentry program. You're a Reiki practitioner. So much. What philosophies guide your work?
Thank you to C21 and also Milwaukee Turners and everyone that showed up today to give me a chance to speak on behalf of Full Circle Healing. So for me, everything that I do when it comes to helping people is about a remembrance of everyone's humanity. And since they are human, they are deserving of dignity, respect, and service. And with Full Circle Healing, that also includes even if they can't pay for it. So our philosophy is that we want to take the classism and the racism out of self-care. And self-care is also healthy. It's getting services like Reiki and chiropractics and all of those other things that you can receive outside of the hospital system that people of color don't typically get to take advantage of. And that also means that we want to connect with other people that can do stuff that we can't do, and find a way for the people that come to us for help to get that help. So I wanted to kind of make my intro kind of short because that encompasses everything. Everything we do is to remember humanity, and humanity equals dignity, respect, and the need for love, and we try to give those.
Share this to bathrooms with threatening walls.
So, oops, I think somebody accidentally came off
there
mute.
we go. Emilio is now muted again. Sorry to interrupt, Martice.
No, you are all good. So our model is, Full Circle is all about healing the person spiritually, physically, also community. It's a full circle. If you want to actually help a person, you have to address all the things. And our current model of helping or medicine kind of leaves some of those things behind. We just want to kind of fill in where we can and make sure that people that especially that look like me feel welcome, and more than feel welcome, that they are welcome. It's not lip service. It's come on in, let's help you.
Thank you, Martice. The remembrance of humanity and how that's defined, not just by the individual, but how it's contingent in many ways on community and various different interpersonal relationships is certainly huge and important to keep in mind. So thank you for your very brief introduction, as you so called it. Moving to Cherie, as a socially engaged scholar and teacher, you engage critically with frameworks and philosophies, but just as often have your hands in the soil cultivating and foraging food. So what philosophies guide you, and which are you excited to talk about in the context of food and land justice today?
Well, excuse me, I'd like to start by echoing the gratitude that the others on this panel have expressed. It's an honor to be included in this conversation. And thank you for all you've done to organize it and make it available to people. Gratitude is certainly at the core of the philosophies that orient me. I also resonate very much with what my fellow panelists have said about slowness and about love. Those are important guiding principles for me. It's really clear in my experience of the world that people care for what and who they love. And in my role as an educator, as a writer, I really cherish the opportunity to make introductions to ways of thinking, to stories that might enhance our love of the natural world, because that makes a quick bridge to care. I also really appreciated your emphasis in the introduction on imagination, because that's another of the orienting pillars of my work. There are two sort of key things that I also in the spirit of a short introduction would lead with in terms of philosophy. One is my observation, the way I tend to phrase it is that the world is made of stories and human beings enact the stories we believe. And I think a lot about what the sort of dominant stories are when it comes to food, when it comes to land, when it comes to justice. One of the writers I quite admire, Daniel Quinn, in his book Beyond Civilization, he talks about there being a sort of dominant global culture, and despite all of the superficial differences and how we dress or nourish ourselves or enact ritual, there's one sort of common uniting factor of modern civilization, as he refers to it, and that is that we keep our food under lock and key. Right, that being the sort of universal uniting factor of modernity, of civilization, and that's the result of a story that we've told ourselves for generations upon generations about what food is, what counts as food, who has access to it, how food and economics and policy intersect. But in my mind, that's a story, and when I look at the consequences of that story, I'm alarmed. And my sense of hope and my motivation for the work that I do is that it's just as true that there are other stories that we can enact. And so again, in the writing, in the teaching, in the farming, in the foraging that I do, I'm really dedicated to making visible other stories. And that brings me to the second sort of orienting philosophy, or guiding philosophy, I think was your phrase. And this is something I draw from the abolitionist geographer Ruth Wilson Gilmore. She defines freedom. She says freedom is not the absence of bondage, but rather our capacity to make the places we are into the places we want to be. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about what are the stories and the skills that we need in order to make the places that we are into the places that we want to be. And that brings me full circle to the qualities that I mentioned at the beginning. The places that I want to be are places where we recognize abundance and not scarcity, where we recognize bounty, where we recognize slowness, where we honor the transformative power of imagination, and so on. So I think those things all intersect, and it's a real joy for me to get to engage these ideas in a classroom setting, sort of bring into an educational environment some of the things that aren't necessarily there. It just baffles me regularly that one can get through the most prestigious educational institutions to the highest degree and not be able to identify an edible plant in the natural world, right? So how do we bring those skills into a setting that otherwise measures value in ways that continue to perpetuate a story that doesn't seem to be doing us collectively a whole lot of good? So it's a privilege for me to enact these ideas in the classroom, but then also to bring students, bring anybody and everybody who's interested into the land, so we can actually, walk through the world and learn to see the bounty that's around us and participate in cultivating that kind of nourishment. So that's a little bit of what guides me.
Thank you so much, Cherie. I think there's a lot of connecting threads here, as I anticipated in many ways, but given that you're all practitioners in different climates, in different spaces, and that your roles are different in each of that, in that work, I'm really excited to talk more about those stories, Cherie, these stories that are alternatives, that are demonstrating that there are different ways to do this, and there might be better ways. How do we imagine the future where we want to be, that we want to see is really evocative and strong and powerful. So in the spirit of bridging the conversation between the three of you, perhaps expanding what's already mentioned, especially with theory and philosophy, because being able to talk about what we value and how we value it can go on to inform many other things, like policy measures. I'm looking at you, Martice, with your most recent excursion to the Hill as part of your fellowship and speaker and your stewardship role, and then the organizations that we form. Ultimately, it informs our actions. So I'm just going to keep this open-ended for whoever wants to answer next. In your teaching and learning, what is a framework for understanding food, land, or farming that got you really excited about what you do today? And do you even remember when you were introduced to that concept, kind of going, Cherie, back to like, when did you learn like what the edible plants are out and around you? It's might not have been in a university setting and likely wasn't. What are, yeah, I leave it open to whoever would like to answer. And if no one
I
feels,
was
oh,
trying to be, I was
yeah, go
trying to wait. I
Martice.
didn't know. I guess I'll go first. For me, I didn't grow up farming, and I didn't really have connection to my family's farming story. But once I actually got into farming, I learned more about grandma and grandpa having the farm and then them losing the farm, which is one of the reasons why we're not down south. We're way up here in the north, in Wisconsin. Um, it I don't know if it's excitement that really, really got me into farming. It was defiance, um, and because most of the people that I was around, I said you shouldn't grow food because that's what they forced our people to do, um, and there still is a lot of that. So um, I wanted to defy that. I wanted to start to grow because I know it's power in growing and choosing to grow, and I also know that this country is it's going to address my community last if there's shortages. And if there's shortages, my community is getting hit first. Um, so so if I start to learn how to do it and I can teach other people, the entire community could possibly float during some kind of situation. uh, and me being in it, I was the first farmer that I knew of that looks like me. I never seen or even thought about farmers that looked like me. And then I met Will Allen here in Milwaukee at Growing Power. Um, and then meeting people like Venus Williams, I was like, we out there, we out here. Even in Wisconsin, we out here. We are numerous and we're powerful, even if we're small. That's what actually made me feel good. And also, I'm willing to be loud. And at this point in time, we need to be loud because there's services and money surrounding land and all that that's already put in place for us. But we have to loudly say, you ain't doing right by us yet. Um, and I guess that's the little bit of rebel. I want to gain the power in learning, but I also want to be a thorn in the government side and say, okay, I'm not interested in lip service no more. Deliver. And if you can't deliver, I'm not going to let you just disappear in the background. I will be there to refute every claim until it's actually working the way it's supposed to. And I know there's a lot of us out there. So I guess it was excited to see about that power, but I'm also excited to take on the government in the sense that I want to make you do what you say you're supposed to do, and I want to make the legislators say the words when they put forward legislation. I want them to say BIPOC. I want them to say LGBTQ. I want them to say all of these things. Put that in the bills, and then I want the other legislators to say no to us. So it's on record. But I'm gonna share the space now.
Thank you, Martice. I have some follow-ups, but I'll wait till a little later to ensure that Cherie and Elizabeth can also respond to the maybe not the frameworks that most excite us about food and farming, but maybe help us think about defiance and resistance and compel us to think about capacity and survival. That's a really important framework as well. And I really thank you for encouraging that and adding that to the conversation, Martice. Elizabeth, Cherie, do you have any responses to Martice or to this prompt of talking about frameworks of understanding food, land, and farming? See, Elizabeth.
Cherie, do you want to go first? Okay. Yeah, I thank you, Martice. That was really awesome to hear, and thanks for sharing. and just for your work. It sounds really amazing. I'm excited to learn more about your farm. It's humbling. I mean, you know, hearing Martice's words, I just feel so, I've felt so privileged as I've gotten deeper and deeper into this work, and just recognize how hard it is for people who don't look like me. And for, you know, people who look like me too. Land access is hard for everybody, but it's harder for people of color. And the history of our country is just so damn sad. I'm sorry, but it's just so wrong. And it's so sad. And that these, like, racism is seen as being in the past, and that those injustices are seen by so many as being in the past. And like lots of legislators are like, you know, reparations. Well, it wasn't I didn't do the harm, you know, and I just don't, there's not a lot of accountability. And so it's sad. And I think, I was reading something recently about accountability and how it's so commonly seen as punishment instead of accountability. And it's not, you know, being accountable, being a good person. I think all three of us kind of mentioned like this human factor of this work. Being accountable to, if you do something wrong, or if you said something wrong, or if your ancestors did something wrong, or if you hurt the land, being accountable to those actions isn't getting punished. It's being a good person. It's realizing, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, and how can I do better? And being curious to do better and to build, you know, stronger relationships built on kindness and seeing each other as human and treating the land as our mother. And so I'm just sort of like, I'm not quite answering your question, but what Martice was saying is just bringing up a lot of like more emotion for me of I guess, yeah, why I'm in this work, and why it's not, we call it work, but it's not work. It's life. And I'm super lucky to get into food and farming, because I didn't grow up on a farm, but my grandpa always had plants, and I just like always remember his nourishment of these plants, and we would spray them every morning, and he just treated them like these most amazing beings. And I think we need to treat them that way, and the animals and the things that we can't see that way, but also each other, and not be afraid to be wrong, but do better. Especially for us more powered and privileged people, but everybody, we can always do better for the land, for ourselves, for each other, and try to work on like ourselves to not feel defensive, but to really be open to a journey of learning, of building trust, this theme for today, for ourselves, that we can do better. Like, I need to trust that I can do better if I make a mistake, and try to change. You know, and then obviously building it for our community, for our food system, and all the others. So I don't want to keep rambling on.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate this this bridging of being self-reflecting, and speaking to these definitions of accountability, and how it does feel like defining accountability. It's not punishment. It's about recognition. It's about acknowledgement. It's about dignity and respect, and anchoring it in that, especially when building community relations across different groups of people with different histories, and also the challenge of different visions for the future too. I'm looking at Cherie as I make my really like wonky transition into your response to the same question, but I saw this comment in the chat of very much looking forward to using the radical imagination Cherie mentioned. And I think that's part of it. It's thinking about the past and the history, as Martice has been inspired by, as well as Elizabeth, but also looking at the future. But I don't want to wed you, Cherie, to that's what your the framework for understanding food, land, and farming, what that does for you.
It was actually the most generous and organic transition, so thank you for that. And I also I don't know that I echo, but can relate very deeply to a lot of what all of you have already said. I too am motivated in a certain sense by defiance, and it's the kind of energy that sparks. I also really appreciate your comments about accountability and the differences between accountability and punishment. I think that's a really important piece to keep in mind. One of the things that really motivates me, I think it's so important that people do the policy level work that you're talking about, the people who are, willing to be loud and to sort of pursue that avenue. I also find it really important to put energy into creating something else, right? And so that's largely where my priority lies. What else can we build? What else might we not only imagine, but actually enact? And how do we do that? And so often I encounter this sort of worldview that's been formed to understand things in a very specific way, as if that's the only way we could ever possibly understand things. And so for me, it's a real challenge and joy to create circumstances that just sort of go, oh, I didn't realize something else was possible, right? I can tell a brief story about the building that I'm in right now, which is on part of the land, and there's a big garden over there while surrounding me. And I apologize if you're hearing roosters; they're feeling very excited on this spring day, but surrounded by all kinds of life. And this building was the result of me having one of those moments of, oh, a total shift of perspective. I had dug out a bunch of garden beds in this wonderful clay soil we have here in North Carolina. And I made this big mountain of clay that I thought I'll just deal with it later. And later came, and I had this big mountain of clay that I didn't actually really want to deal with. At the same time, I was working on a writing project, and I really needed quiet and I needed concentration, and had a little one who didn't feel the need to be quiet when I needed quiet. And I also didn't have the resources to just go rent a space or do something else. And so I was sort of perplexed for a long time until I realized that this big mountain of clay was not, in fact, a problem, but a resource in front of me, right? And that there's a forest right here that is a source of lumber if it's harvested in a respectful and a sustainable way. And we went from the big mountain of clay being a hassle that I have to get out of the garden to being absolutely free building materials that then became a source of joy and creativity to transform into a space where I could have quiet whenever I wanted it. Save the roosters, but these kinds of moments that sort of allow us to pivot in our imagination and realize that there are possibilities that, if we can learn to see them, are wholly and freely available to us. Of course, then it takes skills to enact them, and again, that's where it comes back to what skills we prioritize and value. And I don't want to get circular in my response to you, but I really find a lot of my own energetic motivation comes from, well, how do we create something else for those people who are not nourished by the dominant paradigms and who are limited in their ability to get to a place of nourishment through the tools of policy and the sort of economic pathways that are set up as part of this main story. I also really resonate with the idea that this is not work, but life, that Elizabeth said. I feel that way too. And not only is it life, but there's the potential for joy, right? And I just see time and time again in every opportunity that I have to invite people to interact with plants, the immense joy that comes from nourishing a little seedling into a little sprout, there are the first true leaves, and pretty soon there's a harvest. And when I look at all of the incredible pain that so many people are in, whether we call it a mental health crisis, whether we call it a spiritual crisis, however we want to label it, there's so much pain. And I see this sort of real, consistent yet simple path to a kind of sense of connection and a kind of sense of joy that that comes from getting to build relationships with the natural world. And I don't mean joy in an abstract way. I don't know if people are familiar with Ross Gay, but he has a wonderful book of essays, Inciting Joy, and he makes the point that joy is not an always feel good condition, right? But it's the act of going through the world with our hearts open, right? Which makes them susceptible to being broken, but also to feeling enlivened. And so I think that there's something really powerful about creating the conditions that allow not just for life and work, but also joy.
The inspiration and this definition of joy is so it's so complex for people who have backgrounds in farming or who are farmers or work the land, because the vulnerability of also the broken hearts of that seedling not being able to make it. It's just I remember having a conversation with Martice over the summer about tomatoes and tomato blight and the challenges of trying to grow tomatoes in Wisconsin. But I love this context and this springboard that you've given us, Cherie, of talking about joy and tools of policy, but also remembering, and I'm looking at the chat here too, also inspired by those who are attending right now, that the problem becomes the solution, that the resources in front of us are sometimes the things that we have the hardest time recognizing and taking advantage of, because it does leave you to be more vulnerable if you don't have the skill set on the front end to successfully build a structure like you did behind you. It takes time and it takes the vulnerability to make those mistakes and move forward, kind of going back to what Elizabeth was also talking about too. It's not just in a philosophical sense, but when you're working with the land, when you're working with material things, you have to leave yourself open to those mistakes and the skill building, that slowness that comes with it. So I'm looking at the chat at the same time. There's some really great conversations there, but I'm also realizing that I didn't prepare a question that gets you all engaged with the lands that you do help cultivate and nourish. And I thought that maybe this might be the opportunity for me to just step back and ask each of you really quickly, like Cherie, while I have you here in the spotlight, Uzuri sanctuary and what's cultivated and grown in your space. And then Martice, I'll turn to you for full circle healing, and then to you, Elizabeth, about the forest farm. So Cherie, just like backing up so people know what we're the lands that you're on and the lands, who you share it with, non-human and otherwise.
Well, I think I gave some of that away in talking about gardens and roosters. What I think about in terms of cultivation is both literally physical food and sustenance, but also knowledge. And so the educational piece is a really big part of what we do on this land. And that draws on lots of different traditions. I did have the privilege of growing up in a gardening family, and it's always just been my experience has always been that the earth is where food comes from, and that has been a real gift. What we grow here, I'm looking around, spring crops are going in. We have a 4-season, what I would consider sort of market garden. We grow a wide range of things. We have a fruit orchard and some nut trees as well. We also, in terms of animals, have chickens and goats who are about to kid any minute now. We also have a pollinator sanctuary and some beehives and some land that's dedicated to specifically plants that support pollinator health, native plants that support pollinator health. We've also chosen to leave a lot of the land in such a condition that it's other beings besides us making the decisions about who grows where. So there's a lot of forested land here. We have a lot of wonderful wild mushrooms and all kinds of other wonderful forageable foods, and a lot of the educational work that we do is also then looking at the world and coming to see the bounty that is present, and sort of reckoning with this definition of food as something that comes from a grocery store and medicine as something that comes from a pharmacy, when if we just, if we learn different skills and different, we've learned to see the world differently, quite literally, that can start to shift to seeing food as really truly, and medicine as really truly the sort of structure and fiber of the world that surrounds us everywhere. So there's a lot that just looks like wildland that we think of as a textbook, if you will, for a kind of knowledge that can sustain us.
Thank you, Cherie, for just building out the vision of what you're seeing outside your window, and how it's engaging with the colleagues and the cohort on this panel. Martice, what's on Full Circle Healing Farm? What are you preparing for growing wise? If you don't mind adding a little bit of detail about the operation you're on.
Yeah, so we actually have two plots. We rent both. We do not own the land, and in the way that most Americans think about. We are part of an incubator farm on the Mequon Nature Preserve through the Fondy Farm Project. So we have 2 acres there where we do, just like Cherie, it's a market garden. We grow things from roots to greens. We don't have any trees or fruit other than strawberries. And then we rent another plot at Cole Farm where we have our chickens and our ducks. I'm jealous of Cherie talking about goats. Right now I'm stuck. Let me take her advice. Right now, all I'm able to do is birds. So in my current context, I am a beginner at that, and I probably won't be able to move on to a different species until I become an expert at that. And now I've located the farm somewhere else where I own the land outright. But so the land that we have is just 2.5 acres in total that we rent. But we are also with Venus Williams at the table where we do our healing services off of 53rd and Capitol in Milwaukee. And that's where I do the Reiki. My wife's a therapist. We also do retreats and stuff like that. So that's us in a nutshell.
Thanks, Martice. And also for the reminder that Cherie was also giving us, that the food and medicine being in the land and in the people who are passionate about being and working in the land. Elizabeth, same question with the forest farm that you are operating at the moment.
Sure, yeah. Briefly about our farm, Wellspring Forest Farm. We're on the land, the unceded land of Guayacono, which is the Cayuga Nation on Haudenosaunee territory in central New York. We have 10 acres that we hold the deed to, and then we graze another 30 of our neighbors. We have sheep that we rotationally graze. We're trying to practice mostly agroforestry, if you know those terms, silvopasture, regenerative agriculture. So we have some scrub woods that we're trying to regenerate to have larger trees using the sheep. And then we plant a lot of trees too in the fields. But our main product that we grow is mushrooms, which is more my partner's territory: shiitake, lion's mane, oyster, some others. And we sell a lot of products like elderberry, maple syrup. And then we have a small homestead where I raise meat birds for ourselves and my in-laws. And, we've got our small garden and other foods and medicines. I'm here with my partner, Steve, and I have a 3-year-old and an 8-month-old. But as far as speaking on behalf of Soulfire, I want to mention what they do more. They also have sheep and chickens for eggs. And then they grow a ton of medicine and vegetables. And you can visit their website at soulfirefarm.org. I can throw the link in the chat too, but they do no cost doorstep delivery of vegetables, fruits, and medicine. Also eggs. And so anybody can sign up and doesn't have to pay for their CSA shares, community supported agriculture. And they really are practicing farming in the footsteps of their ancestors. And so really practicing regenerative agriculture, especially from the diaspora and from most of the people, Indigenous and Black people who are the ones who really founded these farming practices that now we generally attribute to white men, were mostly done by people who were forced to be farmers in this country or people whose land was stolen from them. So Soulfire is really committed to re-enlivening those practices and not taking them back so that others can't use them, because that's not Soulfire's way at all, but like re-owning them and reliving through them through their work and through the land. So, and they have so many other things that they do. So definitely check out their website, but that's a little bit about what they grow and their philosophy.
Thank you. And this is also reminding me that we will have a podcast a few weeks out from now where we're interviewing Leah Penniman really briefly about her the newest book project that's coming out of Soulfire Farms. So we have all of those linked up in our recommended readings in the book club for Nourishing Trust as well. So thanks for the reminder, Elizabeth, and also for talking about mushrooms, which are very much a staple, I know, in my household. So this leads me to actually the last question that I've generated. And then we have a few questions from the group. And then for those of you who are watching this, if you would like to put some questions in the chat that you have for this group, please do, and I'll scroll through them in this last half of the event here. My next question and last one directly to you all. It's quite direct, and it's related to a question I asked of the roundtable before this one, and I'll likely ask it for the third roundtable as well. We conducted a survey at the center, and it was clear from that survey that scholars and community leaders here in Milwaukee are really interested in trust as quote unquote a pressing issue of our time. So what do you think about when you hear the title of this forum, the symposium, Nourishing Trust? And does trust come into your work at all? And I know that some of you have answered this a little bit in your intros and the other answers, but I leave that open to the floor, whoever would like to answer that question first. See some gesturing.
On the spotlight, maybe that's why Martice is.
Yeah, well, I will, Elizabeth, and then Martice and Cherie, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think I did mention this a little bit. I think, building relationships at the speed of trust and thinking about how to learn from the land and our relationships with the land. I think that so much of, this quote unquote regenerative practices is to like work with nature and not try to control nature. So there has to be a sense of trust. We have a new babysitter for my 8-month-old who started yesterday part-time, and she's just at this time where she's like, wait, you're not my mom, like stranger, apparently, like in the developmental phase of being a baby. And so I've just been thinking about trust a lot actually in the last 24 hours. And, of just like what is it that we like trust is like recognizing something and knowing it. And so we have to take some time, like with land, you can't just go out and start. Cherie was talking about this big pile of clay all of a sudden she had, we go out and we start digging, and then you're like, oh, wait, the soil has clay in it. Can I grow in this? Like, how do I work with it? Like we have to approach these things without expecting quick answers. Building trust and working with the land is not like an Amazon Prime membership of like instant gratitude or instant feedback. It's always gratitude. So yeah, I think trust is just so key in so many things, and thinking about nourishing trust is a really beautiful concept, like visual. It's not just about food, like nourishment. but really like those relationships. And as like I mentioned, this accountability piece, and not thinking about trying not to be defensive and or punish others. And I think we're in a really, this time of cancel culture is really toxic, in my opinion. I think that our society is moving further and further away from trust-based relationships, both with each other as people, but really we're disconnected from the land for so many reasons, by choice and not by choice. But I think, I think that really has to be recultivated in lots of ways, from policy to like the individual level, so that everybody from kids to adults and beyond, like kind of learns to cultivate that trust in that relationship, but also relearns if it's not there, learns how to do it, learns how to like take time to slow down, to look around, to observe, and to listen a lot more than do and say.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I like this. I kind of am thinking of it as a trifecta. It's what we're learning, what we're relearning, but I'd like to add that it's also what we're unlearning, because that's a hard part too, that I think is part of the accountability and this feeling of defensiveness that you speak to, especially on the part of white people when we're having these conversations. So I appreciate that. That segue and that way of learning in different aspects and angles with your response. Martice, nourishing trust and trust. What does it do for you?
Thank you. When I think of nourishing trust, well, in the circles that I grew up in, trust was something that was just never there. You trusted the people that grew up with you. That's it. That's all. So when I think about nourishing trust, I think about unlearning. I think about something we talk about at the Alma Center, where the majority of the people that I've interacted with, we walk around with a suit of armor and trying to protect ourselves from hurt, where we give no one the opportunity to even earn trust. So for me, when I think about nourishing trust, I think about a gentle hardness to it, where like it's me when people come to the farm, right? Especially the BIPOC people, children in general, and people with LGBTQ community. I am hypersensitive to what's going on for them. And if anybody shows up and I'm in an area where we are typically not invited, I'm very soft to those people that I've been invited to the farm, but I'm very hard to those that are walking up, because I don't know if there's someone trustworthy or there's someone that wants to bring harm to me or anybody on the farm. So nourishing trust to me, I think it's a great title. It's a great thing to aspire to. And I think that it will grow slower than plants. It will grow much slower, because when we think about land, just about all of our history in this country, at least for people that look like me, there's no reason to trust. There's absolutely no reason to trust. The land itself, yes, but the humans, no. So trust is very, very vital, but it's hard to come by. And something that I do myself when people come to the farm, especially if they're part of the community that will be considered disadvantaged, is let them know that I'm one of them, or I'm adjacent to them. And I don't believe in perpetuating them being harmed in any way. It's a safe space if I'm around, even if outside of me is unsafe. My mere being there, I would do everything I can to make it safe. And trust tends to happen. But yes, outside of that, it's going to be very slow. But it's a worthy pursuit. I just don't want anyone to think that gaining trust is going to be an easy process, and it's going to be a very uncomfortable one for those who are trying to get the trust. You basically got to prepare yourself and take them lumps if you need to.
These are all really great points, Martice, and also we're connecting a lot of threads, but kind of summing up as then I transition to Cherie's response, pointing out the power of vulnerability, the difficulty of vulnerability. It's something that's really been pervasive in this conversation, and it's the trickiness, the awkwardness, the toughness of that. And kind of going to Elizabeth's point of what are we recognizing when we recognize trust, or what do we need to recognize to be able to trust someone? Part of that maybe being vulnerability, or how people carry themselves in kindness and in love, what that looks like, and what a trusting relationship does, who is benefiting from that trust that is being extended, and how it's always the person that is extending that trust that has the most vulnerability to the person who is given and granted that trust. These interpersonal pathways are so important for us to recognize. So thank you for pointing those out, Martice. Cherie, same question as we're talking about trust and how it touches our work and what it makes you think about.
Well, I'm really glad that there's been as much emphasis as there has on unlearning, because I think that's essential to this question. And Martice has talked about a lot of the human to human history that brings us to the present moment, but also mentioned the land's worthiness of trust. And I think in there too, there's a lot of unlearning that needs to be done, because as we've talked about, there's a story that of scarcity, right? That's the dominant story. And I think that in order to actually trust the land and the bounty and the abundance that's possible, we have to unlearn the story of scarcity and learn something else instead, right? You can't just unlearn something and then what, right? There's a thought exercise I love to do in class. It's very simple. I say, don't think about an elephant, right? And then the only thing that anybody thinks about is an elephant. So what are you going to think about instead? How do we phrase the question? Otherwise, I think that there's a need to unlearn scarcity, but then instead learn to recognize bounty, learn to recognize abundance. And as far as I'm concerned, that has to be a very active process. It's a really nice sort of rhetorical whatever, but unless it's an active process, it doesn't have any teeth to speak of. So I think about a couple of things. How do we learn what nourishes trust? How do we learn? So for me, that's, like I said, a practice of learning to recognize abundance, learning to recognize bounty, and not in the abstract, but really literally, like, oh, there's a bunch of stellaria. That's not a weed, that's salad. Great, dinner's handled, right? And so on and so forth. So again, it's really learning the specifics of who in the natural world is surrounding us and what gifts they bring. It's also a matter of recognizing gratitude actively, sort of cultivating the muscle of gratitude. There are classes they teach where the assignment of the semester is a gratitude journal. And you can do it however you want. You can take photographs, you can write things, doesn't matter what the format, doesn't matter. But what does it mean to actually train our attention to gratitude on a daily basis for specific things? To actually draw our attention to gratitude. And that leads very quickly to recognition of different forms of bounty and abundance that surround us. I also think a lot about trust. And I probably should have led with this because I don't like ending with the with the heavier of the things, but I had a really formative conversation with somebody once who defined money as the commodification of trust. And that really stuck with me because I think about how central the notion of money is to the stories that we tell ourselves about the world. And if we've taken trust and turned it into a commodity, then there's a whole lot of unlearning that has to be done about what trust actually is and how we can enact it in ways that are based on our own integrity, that are based on our own accountability, that are based on so many of the things that you and my fellow panelists have already said. So I guess the point for me is that unlearning scarcity, and in very concrete, practical ways, learning to recognize abundance, gets to a kind of trust towards the natural world. And then the question of trust between people, I think, has a lot to do with what we do and do not commodify.
Yeah, and it's reminding me, trust might not be the proper term here. It might not be trust what we're looking for. A lot of people are worried about trust, and I think it's enveloped in a whole bunch of things that have happened more recently in the United States. And it was interesting because I had a conversation with Michigan Altman, who's the elder in residence here at UWM with the Electoquini Institute, which helped form the land acknowledgement that I gave at the beginning of the event today. And when I had this conversation with him, he said, I don't know if I like the term trust because it seems so transactional. And I think that it relates to like the commodification of trust and money issue that happens with that language. And so not only unlearning what trust means to us now, but maybe creating a new vocabulary or a new language, creating something new to take a page out of your playbook, Cherie, of what this kind of relationship can look like that's thriving for something that everyone can thrive with. So I'm going to go and see, there's quite a few conversations in the chat right now and quite a few questions, but I am also seeing a question from Martice to the group. And Martice, I wanted to ask, would you like me to ask the question or would you like to ask the question? All right, I will ask the question if that is cool to you. And you can then also just kind of add on if there's other things to think about here. But to the group, what changes do you see being talked about or instituted on the national level that can help us to move towards achieving land equity and further enable food sovereignty for BIPOC people? Or what should be talked about and put forth as legislative ideas for this? So thinking about those tools of policy as thresholds, as Cherie was speaking to and Elizabeth were speaking to, like there's these various different scales to speaking to this. So that's how I'm interpreting this question, Martice, but if you wanted to add on, the floor is yours.
No, you did a good job. Yeah, I don't think I need to expand on that anymore. I'm just thinking about when I asked the question, how do I say it? It's always on us to do right by us. So the question is, do you guys see any movement, government side, to relieve some of the pressure? Like we didn't put ourselves in the position to start with, but it's on us to get out of it. So have you seen any, have you seen or heard of any rumblings of Congress saying that they're actually going to address the situation and using specific language? They do have ways to be slippery with their language, but have y'all heard of anything?
Cherie or Elizabeth, I don't know if you have specific examples in North Carolina or New York, or if anyone in the chat here has any examples speaking to this, to thinking about specific legislative issues or most things happening at the nonprofit sector, I guess is another way of framing this, or educational, institutional.
I'm not, it's definitely not my field of work. I know in New York, there was a land back that happened with an adogination. The New York state, the state gave back a few hundred acres to Onondaga. So that's at least like a state level example. It might have, I think it was state level and not county because it was the state that gave back. So at least there was like, that's a positive example to learn from. But it is sometimes like I think a lot about land back and like reparations. Well, it's like, oh, you borrowed my mug and you smashed it, but now you're going to give it back to me. And like, I don't really want it back. Like when the land was stolen, it was in much better shape than it is now. So I think land back is a really important effort and reparations too, but I don't know if it's the correct answer. It's one answer or one thing, but otherwise, I know you're part of the National Young Farmers Coalition, and if folks are interested in getting more involved with policy, Martice, you can speak more to it. I think the National Young Farmers Coalition is doing amazing lobbying work. This is a farm bill year. The farm bill should be called a food bill. It's not just about farmers. It shouldn't be. It's like SNAP and WIC and so many like school programs, things that are eaten at schools and at prisons and at hospitals, and it's a super important bill. Nourishment bill I see in the chat. It should definitely just not be called the farm bill, but that's who it benefits. It benefits the really large commodity farmers who are, so I won't go down that trap, but I don't know. I don't know a good answer to your question. I know that there's a lot of efforts by some groups, and I think the National Young Farmer Coalition is probably one of the better ones. NOFA, the Northeast Organic Farming Association that I do some editing for, also tries to lobby. They don't have quite as strong of like an equity focus as National Young Farmers Coalition does. But they do really great lobbying and work as far as like anti-chemical and all natural and organic farming. So that's all I have to add, which is not much.
Cherie, anything to add?
I don't really have much to add. It's probably fairly clear by now that policy is sort of it's not my territory. When I was listening to you, though, I was really thinking about the question of scale, because that's one I think about often. And my own effort is really directed at the power of things that happen on a small scale, but that have deep roots and are therefore not sustainable in the sense of sustainability discourse, but enduring. And the very fact of what you're talking about, going and learning how to cultivate your own food and teaching other people how to do that, gives a kind of, as you said, a kind of freedom to float through moments of crisis or and not have that same dependence on these larger and ever increasingly large structures. And I see a tremendous amount of power in that. I'm also really struck by the value of, one of the writers I quite admire talks about an ecology of knowledges and recognizing that there's no single solution that works for everybody, and that the current model is predicated on this idea that there should be one big structure, and whether it's at a national level or increasingly at a global level, it's the right way for people to live, the right way for people to do things. And that very logic is the organizing principle of all modern colonialism, that everybody should do things in the same way. But in fact, there's a tremendous value in people doing things in different ways. And I think there's a lot of power in creating what works in each local area, because each bit of land gives us different instructions. Right. So I have a sort of deep-seated suspicion of the large-scale policy solution, not to say that it's not important work, because we are in the moment that we're in, but in addition to looking at that level, what else can we be building such that we're not perpetually dependent on these large-scale structures that are predicated on the idea that there's a single right solution, and then we have to go out and enforce it and police everybody into doing it the one and only right way to do things. So I think about that, and this might seem tangential, but somehow in my mind it makes sense. I can't watch the chat and actually listen carefully, so I haven't been paying any attention, except something about food apartheid popped across my screen for a moment, and I think about that in sort of similar terms in some sense to what I was just saying about an ecology of knowledges and ecology of practices. in that I've had a lot of conversations about food apartheid as a sort of policy level problem. And I always think, but what are we doing with all of the spaces that are designated as food apartheid, right? And we talk about how to get people access to different food, but at the same time, we have HOA policies, we have, especially in affordable housing, we have policies that say that only ornamental plants are permitted. So I look at that and I wonder where the problem is. You can't plant food, but we can't get you to the food. That just baffles me. And again, I think about this question of imagination, because there are solutions to things called food apartheid that are illegal. But if laws are, we generate, right? Like these are rules, they're not actually natural truths, right? And so I think about ways of addressing these issues that aren't dependent, again, on the structures of policy, but where we can see like, oh, well, there's actually space in a place that could be generating food, which could be nourishing people who are in that place. And if we've chosen to make that illegal, then maybe we should be questioning our own choices rather than building further on them.
Martice, any responses before I go to the chat?
No, that was perfect.
And I'll just say another through thread that I'm seeing in this conversation is intentionality and the importance of intentionality for fostering things like trust and joy, but also the intentionality of how injustices are wrought and how they are embedded into the language of legislation and the decisions that are being made at these like smaller levels, like HOA level, or I also think about the public spaces and public parks and how it's illegal to forage. That's in a lot of places, including Wisconsin, and it's something that people are pushing back up against. So a lot to think about and a lot of different kinds of questions. So thank you, Cherie, for seeing the food apartheid question. It was kind of a general, can we talk about food apartheid and nutritional access? And I think that was answered beautifully. There's this other question that's not in the Zoom chat, but from people who are viewing on Facebook. What are some ways the general community can help cultivate trust in food production systems? Where do we start when we don't know what we don't know yet? It's like that hard, the overwhelming, like you almost freeze moment. Where do you start, and how do you become more educated? Kind of pointing to the question of where were you first introduced to some of these concepts and ideas that are really top of heart and mind for all of you. If anyone wants to respond to that, who's spotlighted, or Elizabeth, and I don't know if maybe we just spotlight Elizabeth too, since this is more of a joint conversation as we move forward to this chat question.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. What are some of the ways the general community can help cultivate trust in food production systems? And then it's like, where do we start? It's a really big question, but maybe elaborating on some other points we've made.
I don't have any singular answers to anything. I hope that's clear by now. But I actually like to think of it as a really small question, in the sense that one place that we can start, if trust is the aim, is by learning to do some of these things ourselves. So we understand the processes, and it sort of takes the mystery away from things. And people often ask me, oh, I want to grow a little bit of food. Where should I start? And my question is, what do you like to eat? Right? Like, it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be theoretical. It doesn't have to be largely ideological. It can be very, very simple. I like to eat spinach, and you can learn about cultivating spinach. Do you have the right conditions? And it's very wise, given the state of land at this time, to learn about soil health so that you're not cultivating in soil that is toxic. And there are some really good resources. I know And Soulfire Farms has a lot of good resources. And in Leah's first book, there's a lot about soil health and some really easily accessible, very specific instructions about making sure that you're growing in soil that is not contaminated, and if it is, what to do to naturally regenerate and rebalance the soil. So that's a really important thing. But short of that, I think really small steps can be much more empowering than we often think. And if we think about tackling the whole food systems problem for the globe or for a country, that's really, really overwhelming. But if we think about cultivating one dish for our family for one season, it might become just a little bit more manageable. And if that turns out to be something that sparks a little bit of joy, or maybe some family time together, or maybe a sense of fulfillment, and the technology takes a back seat and we spend some time actually interacting, and then maybe we want to cultivate something else for the next season, then maybe we want to talk to our neighbors about it, and then maybe we want to talk to our friends about it, and then maybe we get interested, and then there can be a really organic way of building and contributing to a conversation, trusting that there are other people who are also engaged in this process as well. So I guess that's just my way of putting advocating for also thinking about these questions as very, very small ones, where we can do little things, and not to underestimate the power of small actions for opening up possibilities, carving a path that we might not otherwise be able to anticipate.
And not just slowness, but also smallness, those small steps. Martice, Elizabeth, any reactions to this particular question?
I think similarly, what Cherie said, even smaller, like not even if you don't want to grow something, but is it more, are you into cooking, or are you into policy, or like what thread of all the food system stuff interests you? I think everybody should grow, but if you're not a person who wants to get your hands dirty, literally, then maybe there's something else that interests you, and I think and then like do that, follow that, like oh, I want to cook. So if you like to cook, well, what's in season? You don't have to grow it, but maybe you can find it or learn more about it, or whatever thread. But we do need people at all these different levels, from the community level to the policy level to the whatever other level. So finding where you feel like you want to fit in, I think is really important, because doing something you feel drawn to and that you like is going to keep you in it. And I think there's a permaculture principle that's like something like start at your doorstep, or something like, if you do want to grow and you don't have land, there's just so many awesome things you can grow in containers or in a windowsill or on a patio or something, and start getting yourself excited and like just into it. That's how I started when I was living in Washington, D.C., and just like growing little herbs and stuff. And there was and the other thought I was having about this is like, just start asking questions. Like the question that this person asked is great. And then just keep asking questions. Like as you're eating, it's like, gosh, I'm eating this. I wonder where this came from. Like, I wonder what it took to get this to my plate. Or this is pork. What animal is that from? Just like all these different levels of how disconnected we are from all these food systems things, and just start connecting. If you're yeah, I know there's just so many amazing books and so many blogs and whatever. So yeah, finding what resonates with you, because there's not one path at all.
Martice, anything to add?
I think they did a really good job at saying that. The only thing I would add on top of that is like when it comes to what Cherie said, even if you fail in growing the thing, you did it, and it will give you more of appreciation of the people that do it. And maybe you're trying to grow some tomatoes or some spinach, and you start to go to farmers markets, and you start to be able to put a face to the food that's on your plate. Or like what Elizabeth was saying, figuring out what you're really good at. I really suggest you do all three of those things. You know, you try to grow yourself, you go meet a farmer, realize they're a person, and support them financially, learn their name. Because they might not remember your name, because there's a lot of people that's coming to their booths usually every week, but they'll remember you. And when you struggle with that thing, you're already paying them at the farmer's market. There you got a direct person that's growing the stuff that you're growing too, that you can talk to. You know what I'm saying? And then as far as what you can do, see what you're good at. What do people say? They say, oh, you're always arguing. Maybe you should look at policy. You know what I'm saying? Or you can't sit still. Okay, get outside and grow. Or you seem down all the time. There's scientific research that proves that getting your hands in the dirt helps with depression and all of that. Get in the farm. Go befriend a ladybug. You know what I'm saying? Like, do all of those things. But when it comes to trust and all that, you have to do, like Cherie was saying earlier, it's an active process. And when it comes to any of those things, you have to try. I will say one thing when it comes to the questions though. Be mindful of who you're asking the questions to and how many questions you pepper them with. Because you don't want them to have to do too much emotional labor. So just meter that. But if you talk to your people, keep the conversation going. That's another thing. Talk to the people close to you about this. See who your circle is. You might realize that you got a whole circle of people that can help with advocacy or direct service. And we need both of those things.
We're almost out of time here. It goes very fast, these types of conversations. There are a lot of questions like in the chat. Some of the things that we've been talking about kind of answer them, but I think the difficult connecting thread is, are these things that are recommended at the moment of asking questions, taking small steps, doing the small work and the slow work of trust as well as cultivation. The question here that I'm seeing in the chat is, how do community groups and individuals in urban and rural settings address food justice, learn about food justice, and teach food justice? Is this kind of work food justice, or how do we take that work and then bring it to the next step of learning and seeing and thinking about what food justice is? I'm curious of the group here, if we're talking about the same thing, or if there's like another level, another step to get to the food and land justice arc. Go on, Martice.
Okay, I guess I'll go. I was trying to wait to see.
Slow. It's also thinking takes slow work too.
Yeah.
It's a difficult question.
I'm gonna go with like what Cherie was talking about. I want to simplify this. What we're talking about is going to help to remove barriers to folks when it comes to nutrition and whatnot. So yes, it is food justice. And food justice is a very big container. Food and land justice themselves. So yeah, when I think about food justice, is it removing a barrier that's not naturally there? And if the barrier is there naturally, how do we, like Cherie was talking about, how do we rethink that barrier? How can we use that to increase access? And so for me, yes, this is food justice. Anything that removes barriers when it comes to nutrition, especially for those who have not been served well in our current silo of food acquisition. I think all of that would be food justice.
Elizabeth, Cherie?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like Martice said, food justice is a big umbrella, and there's a lot within it. Like, food sovereignty and land justice and just all these, there's a lot within it that are really important. And I think that I'm not sure how to put my thoughts together about it. And I don't want to take up a lot of time, but I think that it's important to recognize I believe it's important to recognize one's place of access and privilege and power if we're talking about food justice work. And so it's easy for white people to like have a savior complex and think that we know the answers. And when it comes to food justice, that's happened a lot and continues to happen. And so being in this space and being interested in food justice is, as a white person, that's what I will speak from, because that's what I am, is like to hold up my humility and recognize, while whatever experience I have, like I don't know what's best for like this community of people who doesn't have access to land or to whatever the situation is. And so navigating, like, depending on what you're interested in getting involved in food justice, just don't, if you're coming in with privilege and power, don't assume you know the best answer, because you probably don't. You might have something really great to offer, and probably do, but make sure it's what's desired. So that's all I'll say about that, I guess.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Cherie?
This calls to mind a talk that Robin Wall Kimmerer gave, where she was thinking through justice in different contexts and different definitions of justice. And I'm wishing that I could pull verbatim to the front of mind how she articulated it. Unfortunately, I don't think it's been a little while. But one of the things that stuck with me from listening to that was the sort of entanglements of the notion of justice with legal structures that are part of a system and part of a worldview, and differentiating that notion of justice from notions of balance, right? And restoring to balance anything that has gotten out of balance. And what does it mean to live justly? What does it mean to live justly with one another, with the land that nourishes us? And I tend to agree with Martice that all of these efforts fall within that umbrella. And I think there's maybe some valuable food for thought in what our conception of justice really is, and what are the roots of that conception of justice. And is it the tool that's going to get us to where we're trying to go? Or is it one of many tools that's perhaps necessary to get us where we're trying to go? But I think there's a lot of value in taking that as some food for thought.
Thank you, everyone. And I wish we could continue this conversation. We talked about a lot of things, speaking to vulnerability, humility, accountability, joy, all of these various different through threads of thinking about food and land efforts today. And I thank you so much to each of you, showing my gratitude and saying it, and it being very specific and intentional to each of you for giving the examples, insight, and wisdom today at this event. So I'm going to go to my outro and then hand it back to Emilio. But thank you all for being here. This roundtable has been recorded and it will be available online. It will also be available as a text publication at a later date. But until then, we do invite you to further engage with these topics through our 6.5 Minutes with conversational podcasts, the interactive book club. Some of the books that Cherie and Elizabeth mentioned in particular during this conversation are in that book club. We also have our Food Journeys survey, and we'll have a story cart going out this summer, which we'll have more details on the website later. And our last roundtable conversation, which is Trust in Action, on April 20th at the same time, at the same place, where we will continue to explore different dimensions of modes of connection by addressing issues of food and land. And that will be with Linda Black Elk, Anton Seals Jr., and Brittany Catellis. So with that, thank you. And I hand it back to Emilio to announce upcoming Turners events.
Oh, thank you, Nicole. This was just a fantastic conversation. It's seldom I feel informed, inspired, and simultaneously hungry. It was such a radical, joy-filled approach to personal and collective food autonomy. It was really human-centered, and I think that's part of why I loved it so much. You brought up one thing before the announcements when you were talking about policy and advocacy. Those mechanisms are so far removed from our lives, and I just wanted to let our viewers know that April 5th, April 11th, April 12th, and April 26th are the 4 statewide Joint Finance Committee listening sessions for their upcoming budget and policy. And if anyone has an interest in this or any other issue that's reflected in the Wisconsin state budget, I invite you to go to one of the 4 cities where they're having this. So Waukesha is April 5th, Eau Claire is the 11th, Wisconsin Dells is the 12th, and Minocqua is the 26th. And you can have an opportunity to advocate on behalf of the issues you are most concerned about. 1, they may be represented in the governor's budget, and 2, they may be represented in the budgets that either the Republican-controlled legislature or the Democrats will offer as hopeful alternatives or amendments to the budget. And that can be found online, and we're sharing that. Thanks also again to our incredible panelists. As Nicole mentioned, this has been recorded. We encourage you to share the Facebook streams. I see it's already been shared some 30 or 40 times in other Facebook groups, and we will alert you all via email when a finalized episode hosted by C21 and the Turners is available. If you're interested in supporting the Milwaukee Turners in our work, we encourage you to visit us on Facebook or our website, milwaukeeturners.org. If you're interested in being a sponsor of the Bell Phillips Forum or seeing some of our other previous episodes, please visit milwaukeeturners.org. We're also currently enrolling new participants in children's and youth gymnastics programs. We have weekly classes, still have openings, including kinder gym, elementary and intermediate gymnastics. We also offer adult gymnastics classes in the evenings. And remember, Wisconsinites, the last day of early voting in Milwaukee is this Saturday at 3 p.m. and our in-person election for everybody in the state is April 4th. Among other things, you will be electing a new Supreme Court justice. If you're available April 8th at 6 p.m., the film Ithaca, Ithaka, is screening, and there'll be a question and answer panel at the Oriental Theater with the directors and producers of this documentary about Julian Assange. Julian Assange's father and brother will be there. It's a moving and intimate portrayal of one father's fight to save his son. The film exposes some of the brutal realities of the campaign to free Julian Assange and the choking of free press. And a personal tidbit, if you stay till midnight, you can catch the Rocky Horror Picture Show and make it a very long double feature. Finally, our annual Milwaukee Turner members meeting and election is 5 p.m. April 17th, right here at Turner Hall. We are very excited to break bread together and enjoy delicious food from Turning Tables Tavern and tunes from DJ Bazan. Once again, you can visit our website if you'd like to join and be a member and invited to the meeting. Until next time, please take care of one another.